So now I'm very excited to introduce Jessica Valenti, celebrating the release of Abortion, Our Bodies, Their Lies, and the Truths We Used to Win. Award-winning writer and activist Jessica Valenti is the author of 7 books, including the New York Times bestseller Sex Object, a Memoir. Her groundbreaking anthology, Yes Means Yes, Visions of Female Sexual Power in a World Without Rape, paved the way for legislation of the same name, setting what's now considered the gold standard for sexual consent. After the demise of Roe, Jessica founded Abortion Every Day, an urgent synthesis of anything and everything happening with abortion rights in the United States. So now, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Jessica Valenti.
Hi. I'm going to steal this so that I can read it. I got here 2 seconds ago, so I'm just getting myself situated. I'm going to say a couple of words, read a little bit from the book, and then we'll do some audience Q&A. How many of you read Abortion Every Day or have heard about? Oh, okay, amazing. Hi. Yay. Thank you. Thank you for reading the newsletter. Thank you for being here. I was a little bit worried that because I didn't tell enough people that I was going to be in DC that no one was going to be here. So I'm really glad to see that that's not the case. So Abortion the book really did come out of the work that I've been doing at the newsletter over the last 2+ years. And since you are all readers, I will not regale you with too much information about that. But really, the hope was always to provide a little bit of order to the chaos. The attacks have been so unrelenting, just nonstop, exhausting, overwhelming, which of course is very much the point. That is all by design. They want to exhaust us into inaction. And so the hope with the newsletter was to sort of create a tool that would let people feel like they knew what the fuck was going on every day. We worked really hard to get this book out before the election. I know Grace is here somewhere. Yay, Grace. Grace worked really hard. If you look at the extremely comprehensive endnotes in this book, that is just packed with research, packed with information. That is thanks to Grace. So thank you very much, Grace. I wanted to make sure that the people who wanted to go out and evangelize about this issue ahead of the election had what they needed. I think a question I get asked a lot doing this work, especially with the newsletter, is, don't you feel like you're preaching to the choir? And what I like to say is, no, I feel like I'm arming the choir. I feel like I'm giving people the information, the language, the context that they need to go out and do this work, no matter what that means to them. Maybe it means, volunteering, starting an organization, or maybe it just means trying to change your roommate or father-in-law's vote. But it all matters. It all matters. Doing this work is really, really challenging, and I'm sure there are folks in the audience who also work on abortion rights and who are feeling that exhaustion. And I just wanted to make sure to say it really is that choir that I'm hoping to arm that gives me hope. I think that the people who are working on abortion rights really are some of the most incredible community members I've ever seen. It's just been so remarkable. I've always written about abortion, but this is the first time I've really fully dedicated myself to the issue. And getting to know the people who are on the ground doing this work has just been completely unbelievable. And so I'm just going to share a quick story. And I've told this one often, so hopefully you haven't heard it. But a few months ago, I went to Florida right after the 6-week abortion ban had been passed. And I was talking to the Amendment 4 folks, and I was doing tours of clinics. And in an independent clinic, there was a clinic manager, who was taking us room by room. But because the ban had just passed, it was extraordinarily empty. And so, we're in the waiting room. Waiting room is completely empty. Takes us to an exam room is empty. And then she took us all the way back to the back of the building, to this very small, cramped room. And in that room, there were about a dozen or more young women, probably all under 25, all on the phone, wearing headsets. Sorry. Jesus. Every time. All wearing headsets, booking bus tickets, making hotel reservations, right? One person was texting with a patient who had never been on a plane before to give them emotional support. And it really made me think about how in every community, every state, there are rooms like that, filled full of people who are working their asses off to make sure that the people who need care can get it. And so I know this work is so hard, and I know hearing about it and reading about it is so hard. And so I hope that you keep that with you as we have this conversation. And speaking of the people who are in the rooms, I wanted to make sure to shout out DC Abortion Fund, who are incredible and so important. And I think we're going to have some stickers and a QR code if you are looking to donate. There's a really serious crisis in funding for abortion funds right now. And these are the people who are on the ground making sure that people can get the care that they need. It is so important. And I think sometimes people think that because you're in a pro-choice state or pro-choice region, that it's not important. That is not true. This region is an incredibly important access point for later abortion care specifically. There are patients who are coming here from my state of New York or states like California because they can't get care there. And so it's extremely important that we're supporting all the abortion funds that we can. There is also someone here from Repro Rising. Raise your hand, Trina. And Repro Rising is working on a constitutional amendment. And before I read, I just wanted to give her the floor for like a minute to explain the work that you all are doing. And I think one of the things I appreciate so much is that you all know that we need more than Roe, right? That is not enough. And so if you want to tell folks a little bit about that.
Hi everyone, my name is Karina Keene. I'm the Executive Director of Repro Rising Virginia. And I just want to let you all know that we're part of a pretty robust coalition right now in Virginia that's working to pass a constitutional amendment. Unfortunately, it will take us more than two years to get it done. So we're a little different than other states because it has to be legislatively referred. But unfortunately, we are just one election away from actually losing our legal access to abortion care. Birth control, IVF, they're coming after it all, as you all know from reading Jessica's newsletter on a daily basis. But I have some postcards here that actually show you the process that we have in Virginia. And I know that in DC we're in a good spot. And, you know, we've got a constitutional amendment happening right now in Maryland. But we just want to make sure that Virginia, because even though it's legal and accessible in Virginia right now, abortion is, we do not have a definitive right in our code, and we do not have a definitive right to bodily autonomy in our Constitution. So I just want to flag this, and thank you, Jessica, for giving me a minute, and hope you'll pick one up. And
of course. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. All that said, I am going to read a little bit from chapter 1, which is called Abortion is Good, actually. Won't read the whole thing, just a little bit of a snippet. I want to leave as much time for conversation as possible. I feel like that's always the most fun part. Abortion is an essential freedom, necessary for the self-determination of women and anyone else with the ability to get pregnant. It is not tragic, something to be apologized for, or a necessary evil. It is proactively, objectively good. There is no benefit in being tentative. For too long, pro-choice Americans, politicians especially, have offered apologetic defenses of abortion. Tepid messaging certainly didn't protect Roe, and it ceded the most important advantage we have, the moral high ground. After all, we're not the ones who are forcing children to give birth. We're not the ones making devastated women carry dead and dying fetuses. We're not the ones mandating that rape victims sign affidavits or that they prove that their attack really happened before being allowed to receive basic care. Forcing someone to be pregnant when they don't want to be is dangerous and cruel, and voters know it. Over 80% of Americans don't want the government making decisions about pregnancy at all. That means the extreme abortion bans going into effect across the country are being passed against voters' wishes. Why then are the people we elected to stop this horror show still putting out polite press releases? Why would we continue to be calm and reasoned? America supports abortion. It's time we acted like it. Part of the reason we're in this colossal mess is that politicians were afraid. They spoke in whispers and favored choice over abortion. Instead of hammering home that we are right and that anti-abortion legislators are horrifically, dangerously wrong, they let conservatives call themselves the party of life. They didn't listen to years of advice of reproductive justice activists about the power of unapologetic support for abortion. Instead, they said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, powering Republicans' claim that there's something wrong with ending a pregnancy. There's not. We have the chance, right here and now, to change the conversation. We can get out of the defensive crouch and force legislators to do the same. And as awful as our post-Roe world is, it also gives all of us the opportunity to build something bigger and better, both legally and culturally. There has never been a better and more important moment to ensure our humanity is truly counted. No more hesitation, no more compromise. There's no such thing as a middle ground for our freedom. Because while abortion is a necessary and normal part of reproductive health care, and we should fight for it as such, it's our liberation that conservatives most object to. That's why they're passing bans. After all, if this wasn't about power, control, and punishment, why would some women be allowed abortions when they're raped? It's those of us who have sex willingly they want to teach a lesson to the most. The truth is that most anti-abortion sentiment and law is rooted in the idea that pregnancy is a punishment, a consequence for those who behave irresponsibly or promiscuously. The more ideologically pure lawmakers, those who believe in total abortion bans without exceptions for rape, incest, health, or even life, aren't any less punitive. Their push for fetal personhood, which defines fertilized eggs and zygotes as full constitutional human beings, eradicates women's humanity entirely, rendering us mere vessels for a handful of cells deemed to be the real human beings. What worse punishment is there than not being seen as people at all? That's what makes abortion good. It recognizes the humanity of us, something I truly cannot believe is somehow still up for debate. Women have spent decades trying to convince the government that we deserve to control our own bodies. We've explained, calmly and politely, that the ability to choose if and when to have children can be the most determinative factor in a person's life. We've provided research showing that those who are denied abortions are more likely to stay with violent partners and live below the poverty line. We've shared our most personal experiences, recounting stories of sexual abuse and domestic violence, financial hardship, and medical trauma. We've shown them that abortion is safe, much safer than pregnancy, and we've rebutted misinformation. We've knocked on doors and raised money, debated at school, work, and on the floors of Congress. We've started organizations and research groups. We've raised awareness everywhere, from pop culture to your local hair salon. We voted, election after election, year after year. What has it gotten us? Not only was Roe eliminated, forcing our daughters and granddaughters to grow up with fewer rights than we had, but somehow we're still debating. Why are we still trying to convince people that 1 in 4 American women aren't murderers? Do we really think that one more story of a child raped by her father will move the hearts of men who would legislate away our humanity without even bothering to learn remedial facts about pregnancy? Asking for our rights didn't work then, and it won't work now. I refuse to explain over and over again that women are people. I'm done degrading myself by sharing the most intimate details of my life with strangers in the hope that perhaps one will muster a spark of empathy. Why should we beg for scraps of humanity from those who will never give it to us? Instead of offering diplomatic explanations for why abortion is necessary to protect women's health and lives, it's past time to speak plainly. Abortion is normal and moral. Not just because abortions are common, even though they are, or because women are happy to have access to them, even though that's true. Abortions are a proactive moral good because they allow people to control their own bodies, lives, and futures. What's more, abortion creates lives. Ask your friends and family how their abortions changed them. Ask what they were able to do, what path they were able to take, because they had the freedom to end a pregnancy when they needed to. Abortion is often framed as the end of something. Even pro-choicers say that someone terminated or ended a pregnancy. But often it's very much the opposite. For many, abortion has been the start of something. When I had an abortion at 28 years old, I was in the middle of writing my first book and just a few months away from meeting the man I would marry. The life and family I have now simply would not exist without that abortion. I would not have started a relationship with my husband, Andrew, and I would not have given birth to my incredibly loved daughter, Layla, a few years later. A world without them both would be a much dimmer life, and it's one I prefer not to imagine. The abortion I had did more than allow me to create my family, though. It had ripple effects. All abortions do. Because of my abortion, I wrote books and gave speeches. I did work that helped other women, and it wasn't just about feminism. When I was pregnant with Layla, I became critically ill with something called HELP syndrome. Both my daughter and I almost died, and Layla was born 3 months early at just 2 pounds. Soon afterward, I wrote about the hardships of being a mom to a preemie, something I know made a difference in the lives of parents who were going through the same thing. 13 years later, I still get emails about the pieces I wrote during that time. Without my abortion, none of that would have happened. Without abortion, I wouldn't have the friends I have now, or the career, or even my very life. Because when I got pregnant again 3 years later after Layla was born, the chances of my getting sick and dying this time were significant. And so I had a second abortion, one that broke my heart because I desperately wanted another child, but ensured my daughter grew up with a mother. Those who rail against our rights like to divide women into 2 groups, those who have abortions and those who have children. Most often, though, we're both. Those who would see abortion banned like to pose hypotheticals about the remarkable baby a woman could have if she just didn't get an abortion. What if they cured cancer? Rarely, if ever, does anyone ask if that woman herself might change the world. They don't consider that we could be the remarkable ones if only given the chance. But the lives and experiences abortions create don't have to be extraordinary to matter. I think less about the books I've written because of my abortions and more about how without them, Layla's best friends never would have met her. Or how the dogs lucky enough to be walked on my block wouldn't have a lanky blonde girl running up to them to give pets and compliments. I think about my husband and how he would have moved back to California had we never met and how sad that would be for New York. It would. I think about the dinners we've cooked, my daughter's sun-kissed cheeks on vacation, and the way we used to fall asleep in the same bed when she was a toddler. It's the everyday moments of my life I'm most grateful for. Those are moments that abortion gave me. All abortions create something. Paths forward, lives lived, connections made. Some are hard, some are beautiful, but all are chosen. That's what we lost when Roe was overturned, the ability to decide our own way in the world. What's been taken from us is about more than our rights or our bodies. We've been robbed of our freedom and our self-determination. And to me, that is unforgivable. I think I'm going to end there. Thank you. Thanks. I wanted to leave as much time for a conversation as possible because I think that's super fun. So if anyone has a question, there is a microphone right here at this pillar. If you're behind this pillar, you're not going to see it, but it is right here. So please feel free. There always has to be the first brave person to come forward and do it. Usually it's a guy, so let's see if I can shame anyone into... Yay, thank you.
Hi, I'll go. So thank you so much I've been following you since you did Feministing.
Feministing, baby blogger, a million years ago. Oh my God.
And so you've been such a voice for, I was a young mom at the time reading that. And now watching your TikToks and I follow your Substack. And so I really want to thank you for just being such a voice for information. It's, at times I felt alone and you were there, to make me feel better. So now, so what can we do now? That was powerful what you said. How can we, what can we as just individual people do for that message?
I mean, I think in addition, there's a couple of things. I always say start local, start small, right? I guarantee you there are people in your community doing the work already. Ask them what they need, ask them how to support them. Contact DC Abortion Fund, contact Repro Rising, right? I think that there is the political on the ground work that could always use more help, more money, more time. But I also think that there is this sort of everyday culture work that we can all do when we have conversations with people. And that's part of the reason I started the newsletter. You know, it was in part because there is that much news and I want people to be updated. But it's super depressing. It's super depressing. But it's also, I think we do need to be talking about abortion every day, right? Like in our regular conversations. I think the thing that the anti-abortion movement is hoping for the most is that we'll be too exhausted to do anything, or that this will become normalized, right? And that's the big one. They're depending on women's suffering becoming normalized. They are depending on us when we see another story of a woman who died because of an abortion ban, feeling so overwhelmed that we're like, oh, okay, turn the page, right? Or like we sort of shake our head internally and turn the page. They want to make this a normal part of our life. And I think by talking every day with our friends, with our family, did you hear about this story? Sending someone a link to something. It makes it so that that doesn't happen. We need to make so clear to the people in our lives, our families, our communities, that there is nothing normal about this, right? I also think, and this is an obsession of mine at the newsletter, holding media accountable whenever we can. And I mean that not just like big media outlets, but small local ones as well, right? Like holding them accountable and making sure that they are covering this issue, covering it in the right way, using the language that is most helpful.
So I have a question about that. So not to anybody else can come up and ask a question. So, you know, these like 6-week abortion bans and they say like it's before women know that they get pregnant, but they don't explain like how you're not even pregnant when you start counting pregnancy. Like it's from the day of your last menstrual period, right? Is there a way that we can get the media to explain that to people? Because when they say it's before women even know that they're pregnant, I think some people think, oh, women are so stupid they don't know they're pregnant yet. And they don't explain that part of those weeks they're not even actually pregnant. They haven't conceived.
I mean, I think that part of it is this medical misinformation, right? Or like lack of explanation. But part of what I'm worried about is just getting them to write about it at all, outside of the political races, right? Like I am really curious to see what happens after November. Are we going to see the same level of storytelling? Are we going to see the same level of journalism happening? And are they going to go beyond the surface? One of the things I am sort of aghast about is the fact that we basically hear nothing about travel restrictions, right? Like 2 states have passed travel restrictions on teenagers. Multiple counties in Texas have passed travel restrictions, local ordinances on people of all ages. And this is not something, like to me, if they were limiting men's right to travel or talking about it, it would be on cable news 24/7. It would be the front page of every newspaper, right? And so I think it's also about, are we going to talk about more than, will Trump veto a national ban? Like, let's get into the nitty gritty of these stories and what is actually impacting people's ability to get care. Thanks.
So at one time, some Republicans used to support abortion, Betty Ford, whoever. At one time, some Republicans used to support abortion rights.
Yeah.
Has that completely gone away? Are there local Republicans or allies in Congress that support this effort?
Right. Sure. So the question, and I'm sorry, I was asked to repeat the question into the mic when people ask questions. The question is, you know, there used to be Republicans who supported abortion rights. Are there Republicans who do? There are some, but like clearly not enough. I think what's really interesting is that there are actually a lot of legislators, especially now that they're seeing the sort of consequences of abortion bans on voters, and that voters are really mad. There are Republicans who have shown interest in passing exceptions, for example, right? They're not willing to like go whole hog, but they're willing to pass exceptions. But because of the power that anti-abortion groups have in these states, in these communities, it's not happening. A really good example of that is in Tennessee. So after Roe was overturned, Tennessee's trigger ban went into effect, they did not have an exception for women's lives. There was no life exception. What they had to do, doctors had to break the law in order to save someone's life with an abortion, and then after the fact, defend why it was okay to do, right? And so when there was all this outrage, Republicans there were like, maybe we need to pass a life exception. Big national groups like Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, Tennessee Right to Life right there in the state, lobbied the shit out of them to not make that happen. They ended up passing like a very watered down, nonsense exception. But I think that's really important to remember. Like, they are out there lobbying to stop exceptions for life, which is a little bit of a tangent to your question. I'm sorry, but I guess my answer is I think the interest that some Republicans have shown in creating movement on this is being stymied by the incredible power that these groups have over legislators.
Okay. Thank you for all that you do, and I have so many comments, and I will limit myself. But first, Marylanders, vote yes on question 1, our own constitutional amendment. I've already filled out my ballot, right? Drop it in the Dropbox. I'm a law school dropout, and it's when situations like this have come up that I kind of regret that my career path took me well away from the law. But I wonder if you have ever heard of cases where people have challenged these bans on like an Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment area, or like you were just saying about travel bans, how that doesn't conflict with things like interstate commerce clause. These kind of, if the the forced birth movement is going to use all the legal tricks in the book to keep women from having these rights, how we can use those words against them and say, well, you can't restrict travel because that would violate the Constitution. Right. And people who are being forced to almost die before they get medical care are not being subject to cruel and unusual punishment when they haven't even been charged with a crime, or they have been because they're a person of color who happens to have a miscarriage.
Yeah. I don't know. And the question was, are there lawyers, legal groups that are sort of using creative ways to fight back against these laws, like using cruel and unusual punishment? I don't know about that specifically. I think in Idaho, there is a lawsuit about the fact that the exception for life, right, allows someone to suffer incredibly up until that point, that in Idaho, it is okay. You don't get an exception for an abortion if paralysis is a risk, right? If losing major organs is a risk. And so I think there are lawsuits that are focusing on that. And I think that's incredibly important. And I would love to see more of that. And if I'm incorrect or missing some legal strategy, please, please, please let me know. For travel specifically, I'm really interested in what the tactic is going to be. Their tactic, I think, was laid out really specifically by the Attorney General in Alabama. He wrote a legal brief that said, we're not restricting women's right to travel, but we could if we wanted to, in the same way that the state has the right to restrict sex offenders' travel, right? Because in the same way the state has a vested interest in protecting sexual assault victims, the state has an interest in protecting fetuses from women who might traffic them across state lines. And I think that that is a really important thing to remember. And this is something the anti-abortion movement has even said explicitly. The guy who does all of the anti-trafficking ordinances in Texas, for example, because they apply to women of all ages, someone asked him, well, how are you calling this trafficking if these are adult women who are leaving the state of their own accord? And he said, well, the fetus is always being trafficked. And that is where they're going, right? They are going to this place where if you are pregnant and crossing state lines, that you are trafficking your own fetus. And I know it sounds so outrageous. And when I've had this conversation before with people, they're like, there's absolutely no way that that's happening. Unconstitutional. It's never... That's what they said about Roe. I really think it's important that we're thinking 5 steps ahead on this, right? Both from the legal perspective and having these conversations and cultural.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for the work that you're doing. I run the Vote for Abortion campaign, and we use your newsletter as Bible, essentially.
Amazing.
Every single day, I'm sending it to my social person. And we have 30 days left until this election, and I know where we sit, we are kind of hoping to use the next 30 days to clear up confusion, particularly in states where we're seeing a lot of confusion, where there are abortion initiatives on the ballot. In Arizona, we're hearing there's a lot of confusion on the ground.
Yeah.
And so as you think about the next 30 days, I wonder what the strategy is for your newsletter in terms of arming people with information, and using that, in the capacity that you have.
Right. So the question is, how am I thinking about my strategy at the newsletter in these critical weeks before the election? I am really focusing on disinformation, misinformation, and language, especially the language and disinformation that we're seeing in battleground states. There is so much, and they are so good at it. And that's why the other thing I'm focusing on is trying to call out media outlets as much as I can when it comes to language like ban, right, which we've seen all sorts of messes about, and trying to highlight as much as I can the activists from ballot initiatives who are seeing this sort of thing on the ground with deliberate confusion, right? Like I think Nebraska is a really good example where there is a pro-choice amendment on the ballot, but because Republicans know that these amendments have been so successful for abortion rights activists, the anti-abortion groups there funded and worked with by national organizations have created sort of this fake pro-choice amendment that is actually a ballot initiative that would enshrine Nebraska's 12-week ban into the state constitution, but they're using very similar language to the pro-choice one to confuse voters. And in Arizona, that's something that Republicans were considering doing there. There was this leaked plan where they were considering proposing a ballot initiative that would enshrine restrictions into the state constitution. And the names that they had for it were things like the Arizona Abortion Access Act, the Arizona Abortion and Reproductive Rights Act. I mean, they were really co-opting as much pro-choice language as possible. And so I think the other tactic and the other part of my work I'm trying to do as much as possible is reveal who these players are. Right? Like shine a light on who these folks are in those communities, because sometimes people don't know. They're really, really good. In Nebraska, they collected hundreds, thousands of signatures from people who thought they were signing on to a pro-choice amendment. And so I think, that's a very long way of answering. Yes, I'm really very focused on disinformation, misinformation on local, national level. And I feel really grateful to the local and state groups who give me a heads up about what's happening so I can sort of spread the word. Because what we found also is that when something happens in one state, that strategy, because it's being dictated by these big national organizations, are often exported everywhere, right? Like what they tried in Ohio is now happening in Nebraska, Arizona, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask you quickly about a recently litigated Supreme Court case in Maryland. It's the Moira Ackers case. I don't know if you're familiar. Okay, so in Maryland, she was convicted of murdering her newborn. And as a part of the prosecution's murder, that you have to prove intent to do a murder charge, they put forth evidence of her Google searches, searching local abortion clinics, and also into evidence a conversation that she had with her doctor regarding aborting this pregnancy before she ended up losing the pregnancy. So I was wondering if I could have your thoughts on this idea of a decision like this, especially coming out of such a progressive state and the ramifications it could have, especially in the South, but for everybody.
That's a great question. It was what was the name of the case I want to look
Moira Ackers.
Moira Ackers. So this is something I've been writing about a lot, this idea of intent. I think it's really incredibly important that we're paying attention to the way that they are changing legislation. They're changing bans. They're saying, well, women are suffering, so we're going to clarify the ban. We're going to fix that ban for you. But what they do is they go in and they redefine abortion as an intent, right? Abortion is a medical intervention to end a pregnancy for whatever reason. But they're saying miscarriage treatment is not an abortion. Ending an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. It's only an abortion if you have that intent. And we are seeing the exact reason why they're doing that, right? That is very much linked to criminalization, because all of a sudden, if you have a stillbirth and someone can show a Google history that says, well, maybe I was thinking about getting an abortion when I was 6 weeks pregnant, they can make the argument that you were considering that. And we even saw that in Brittany Watts's case in Ohio. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this. If you're not, this is a woman in Ohio who was arrested for abuse of a corpse after flushing her miscarriage in her home. And the reason she also miscarried at home was because she was denied treatment at this hospital. And in the hospital notes, it had something that said, we're worried because she asked about an abortion. Now, if you know your fetus is not going to survive and you're getting iller and iller, it makes sense that you would ask, when are you going to treat me? But that was used against her. And so it's something I'm extraordinarily worried about. And I think we're already seeing this happen with criminalization. And groups like, if you're interested in this, groups like Pregnancy Justice are doing, amazing, cutting edge, have been for years, work on this. And they actually just came out with a report that showed since Roe was overturned, there's been 210 pregnancy-related arrests and cases. And we don't often hear about them because they're not talked about as abortion cases, right? In Brittany Watts's case, for example, when the local media covered it, it was covered as a crime story. It was covered in this really horrific, sensationalist way where they're like, oh, woman shoves her baby down the toilet. That's what she flushed a miscarriage. Woman shoves a baby down the toilet. It is not a coincidence that Brittany Watts is Black, just as it's not a coincidence that the woman who was arrested in South Carolina for her pregnancy ending was Black. And I think that is the other thing that they are counting on. They are counting on people. They're counting on American racism to sort of uphold what they're doing, and that people won't care because the people who are going to be criminalized and impacted the most and first will be the most marginalized groups. And so they're sort of hoping that people won't notice. But it is also, I hate to keep coming back to the media, but it is also a media issue when you have local media or, outlets covering these in this really sensationalist, horrific way. And then national outlets don't necessarily pick up on it as an abortion story, as a reproductive rights story, because they think it's just some local crime story. And that's the other reason I'm trying to do this work with the newsletter, where I'm surfacing these sort of smaller local stories and giving the context for them. And I think that's something that we can all do, honestly. Thank you. That's a great question.
Hello. Apologies for bringing it back to Ohio, but I wanted to thank you for your coverage of our Issue 1 movement in 2022. It was really helpful. I was wondering, so in a lot of these states, they're not passing full constitutional right to abortion, right? A lot of times they're up till viability, like in Ohio or other areas like that. And I'm wondering how you think about and talk about constitutionalizing rights to reproductive health in some forms of pregnancy, but then also relegating other forms of pregnancy to illegality by making that constitutional amendment, and how you sort of think about and talk about that trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, so the question is about ballot initiatives and how so many of them that we've seen are using language around viability. And so in effect, and I would argue this, you're enshrining a restriction, right? That's what's happening. You're enshrining a restriction. I'm very worried about it. I'm really, really worried about it. And a lot of the abortion rights activists who I've spoken to, the folks that I trust the most, are also very worried about it, because their concern is that once, let's say, a ballot initiative gets passed and it's at 24 weeks, the way someone put it to me is, I'm worried that once middle-class white women have the ability to get their abortions again, that all of that energy and support is going to go away. And that is an understandable and very real fear. The other thing I think about is not wanting to do this all over again, right? And that's why I write in the book, we have an opportunity to build something that was better than Roe. I don't want, my daughter is 14, I don't want her to have to be doing this work 20 years from now, right? I think that there is a real understandable desire to limit as much suffering as we can to get some kind of access back and available on the ground. And I understand that, I respect that, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for the folks in these states who are doing such incredible work, right? I say this often, but it's true. It's very easy for me to have this opinion as a writer in New York working behind a laptop, right? But I do really hope that we can find a way to move beyond viability language and limits. And viability is in scare quotes because that's not a real medical thing. There is no medical standard for viability. And I'm sure a lot of you know this because I harp on it at the newsletter, but one of the reasons that pro-choicers are doing that is because they're afraid that conservatives are going to attack them as supporting abortion up until birth. They do that anyway. They do not, no matter what language you use, that's what they do. And in fact, in some cases, like in Florida with Amendment 4, using language around viability means they attack that specifically, that they're trying to redefine viability. And so I think that I support the activists on the ground. I think they're doing amazing work, but I am very, very worried about the idea of enshrining restrictions, especially when you're talking about the people who are the most vulnerable and need the most help when you need abortion care later in pregnancy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just wanted to say, piggyback on Tarina, I'm actually working with her as well in this coalition in Virginia. Whoever is here from Virginia, you should be seeing our press release, and we're launching our website next week to talk to the public about what they can do and how they can help. Awesome. The gentleman, well, he's not a gentleman, the person from Texas, Mark Lee Dixon, is who you were speaking of.
Yeah.
Some people in Virginia may not realize he was trying to get the Board of Supervisors in Grayson County, which is in Southwest Virginia, to declare it an unborn sanctuary. So I think this is how, they chipped away Roe because they chipped it. They didn't just come in one fell swoop. Yeah. They chipped and chipped. So I think that's what we're gonna see, unfortunately, going forward. My question for you is, fetal personhood, I think, is the biggest problem that we are going to have. What state is, I don't want to say closest because I don't want them to be, but what state is closest to passing a fetal personhood bill?
I mean, I think, so the question was, what state is sort of closest to passing a fetal personhood bill? I mean, I think states like Alabama already have that in effect, right? And we saw that again with Alabama's Supreme Court decision calling frozen embryos extrauterine children, which was a trip. Yeah. Yes, fetal personhood is it's top of the list for everyone. And I think one of the ways that we can pay attention to fetal personhood is not just through the language and the laws and where are they saying specifically fetal personhood, but the way that criminalization happens, right? That is one of the entry points for them with cases like Brittany Watts, right? Pregnancy Justice outlines all of these cases, for example, where if someone had a stillbirth or if someone had a miscarriage, they charge them with child endangerment, right? Or child abuse. And so that is how they're laying the groundwork, is through using criminalization tactics. And so I think it's really important that we're paying attention not just to the law, but how these things are enacted on the ground and of course who they're enacted on. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. You mentioned, aiming to replace Roe with something better. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that would look like, in particular, sort of taking into account the ways in which prosecutions, particularly of women who have had abortions, for those abortions tend to, my understanding is even post-Dobbs, tend to not be charged as violating anti-abortion laws, but as you mentioned, child abuse, infanticide, violating local ordinances on disposal of human remains, and sort of how something that took the place of Roe to enshrine reproductive freedom could address the fact that prosecution often is not explicitly tied to abortion.
Right. So that's a great question. It's, when so much of this criminalization is happening using not abortion laws, not saying that someone is guilty of violating an abortion law. How do you fight for something that is better than Roe to protect those people? And I think fetal personhood really is sort of where we end up at, right? Ensuring that that doesn't happen, ensuring that it sounds so obscene that I have to say this, that women are seen as constitutional human beings, right? Like, I hate that I have to say that. Yeah, I think it does very much come down to fetal personhood. And yes, I think it is important for people to know that nearly all of this criminalization is not happening by saying you broke the law around abortion, right? And that's deliberate because they know that those laws are extraordinarily unpopular. The idea of arresting someone for an abortion is extraordinarily unpopular. That's what we saw with the teenager in Nebraska, right? She was 19 years old. She self-managed a pregnancy. And when pro-choice activists started talking about, holy shit, they are sending this girl to prison for self-managing an abortion, the antis said, no, it was for, improper disposal of human remains. And so, yes, fetal personhood, and also making sure that people understand the connection between those things. I don't know that everyone does, right? Like when we're doing triage just on, oh my God, can so-and-so get care? Can we make sure that women are not dying of sepsis in emergency rooms? It feels really hard to do that very important work. We have to find a way to sort of do all of it, which is exhausting and complicated, but not impossible, I hope. Hi.
Hi, thank you for being here. You talk a lot about language, which is an obsession I share. And
Excellent.
I feel like we see all the time the ways we're losing on this front. And like conservatives, anti-abortion extremists, whoever, are much better at being really disciplined and coming up with new narratives that suit them. And I wonder if there are examples that come to mind of when people who support abortion access, progressive, whoever, have like won on this front or are winning, and what we can learn from that.
That's a great question. I don't know. The question is, conservatives, anti-abortion groups have so often won the language war. Like, are there any examples of us doing really well in this regard? I think language around freedom has done really, really well. But I think a lot of the language wins that we've had have really had to do with being straight about who they are, right? Like using the word ban, which they are so desperate to get away from. Unfortunately, language like forced birth, forced pregnancy has not gotten the traction I think that it deserves or that I would like to see. So I think it would be really interesting to think about, like, what can we talk about along those lines, right? Like that is something that we're missing. I don't know. I'm going to think about that. And now I feel like I have to write a column about it. So thank you for my next column idea. I'm going to think hard about that and write about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. So you've been doing this work for a little bit now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how do you maintain hope through the slog, and what gives you hope?
It really is. The reason I told that story at the beginning is because it really is the people who are doing this work that give me an incredible amount of hope, and remembering that I'm not alone in it. I think so often reading these stories every day, seeing what's happening, it's really easy to feel crazy. Like, I think that is what's hard. I feel like, am I the only fucking person who sees what's happening? Does no one see how bad this is? That feeling of being alone can be really difficult. And I have not felt that way in I've not felt that way in a really long time because of the community at the newsletter, because of the community of people who are doing this work. I think making sure that if this is something that you care about, that you are in community with some folks, no matter what that means, right? It doesn't mean you have to go and volunteer somewhere, right? But like that, people that you can have conversations with about it, that you can check in with. it's really hard. It's really challenging. And I think the other thing that's so important about maintaining hope is being comfortable with the idea that this is going to be a long process, right? I think it can be really hard because we want so badly, again, to stop this suffering as much as we possibly can, to like help anyone that we possibly can. And we can do that. We can do that on a day-to-day level. I know it is so hard. I get it. But we have to be able to maintain that sort of like marathon, not sprint mindset, which I know is it's so challenging. I really get it. I'm sorry. But I hope that you know that there are so many people who care just as much as you do, who are really working so hard to make sure this is going to be okay. I think one of the things that's really difficult about this work is not just you're trying to stop the suffering, you're trying to make sure people can get care. There is existential damage that is done to your soul when you live in a place that doesn't see you as a human being, right? Like that is a really bitter pill to swallow and a hard thing to live with, no matter where you live, no matter what the law says in your state. Making sure that you are taking care of yourself by finding those people, I think, is the best advice I can give you. Thank you.
You talked about language, and I think it goes a little further than that to an education problem. I don't think very many men, and maybe even some young women, don't understand what a woman's menstrual cycle is at all.
Yeah.
And guilty as charged when I was younger. And it took my daughter becoming of pregnancy age for me to look into this a little more and find out, okay, what do I need to do to keep from having, my daughter become pregnant, other than pulling out my shotgun, which is a guy's go-to, sorry. But I've now had some really, in fact, she's one of these subscribers too. Sorry, I get emotional about this.
No, it's okay. It's emotional.
It is. But I had some really good discussions with her. And after her first child was born, she had 3 miscarriages. And, of course, then abortions. And at the time, I didn't realize those were classified as abortions.
Yeah.
No, they were miscarriages. Okay. But no, those are medically abortions. And we don't understand that. And part of the reason we don't understand is we don't understand the menstrual cycle. Talk to your boyfriends, talk to your husbands, educate them. Sit them down and tell them, no sex for a month unless you sit down and learn this. I am serious. Because until you can get the men understanding what it is you go through every month, other than, okay, there's a couple of days I got to get out of the house. Until they understand what you go through all the time, they're never going to be out there and willing to fight for you the way you're doing. And you need that. You need us as allies. And I need to talk to you later because I'm from Virginia, as you can see. And I'm an officer of election and been sitting and doing the election in our early voting. And I'm seeing some interesting, I won't say trends, anecdotes. I've been doing the curbside balloting where I go downstairs and help people that can't come upstairs or don't want to. And we tell them, turn your ballot upside down, put it underneath the sheet that we give you, but a lot of them don't.
Sure.
They don't care if I see. So I see a lot of ballots. And the most interesting thing I've seen a lot of ballots for Harrison Wells, which has been heartening. But the most interesting thing that I've seen is that every single one, we've got a constitutional amendment this year to, right now, the way Virginia law is written is that if someone dies in combat, their surviving spouse gets property tax exemption. They're trying to change it so that it's if someone dies in the line of duty, so it doesn't have to be in combat, they will also get property tax exemption. 100% of the no's that I've seen have been Republican ballots.
Right.
And they're the ones that are always, we're for the troops, and it's all bullshit.
Yeah. I can't speak to that latter part, but I am sure that you are correct. But I do want to say something about your first question about education. I think it's so incredibly important what you're saying. I think a huge part of this is a lack of education, lack of sex education, right? That sex education needs to include menstrual cycle, all of the things. And I think we need to remember that is why there is this fight against sex education, right? It was in Florida where they didn't want teachers to talk about periods. They didn't want them to be able to talk about menstrual cycles up until high school, even though we know that that is not the age that people get menstrual cycles. That is all by design, right? If you have a state where no one knows what happens with their body, birth control is not accessible, abortion is not accessible, you are controlling those people. So yes, agreed, education is super key, and not just with young women, girls. So thank you for that question. I know we have time for one more.
Jessica, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to hear you. My question is about how do we most effectively channel our incandescent rage that we have all the time, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that feeling in this room. I know you're talking about a marathon, but we're in a sprint to the next 30 days for the election. What do we need to be doing to spend our time, tears, and treasure most effectively in the next 30 days?
Oh my God, what a question to end on. I mean, it's so dependent on where you live and what's going on in your community, right? And on your ballot. So I wouldn't dare to say what you should be focusing on in DC, Virginia, Maryland. But to your question about rage, which is something I think about a lot, I do think that rage is an incredible motivator, right? I think that for so often feminists especially have been sort of told to, like, you don't want to come across as angry. We want to bring people in. And with the abortion rights movement in particular, I think for a lot of years, it was about, we have to reach this middle ground. We have to, we want to get like moderates. I don't think that middle exists anymore. I really, really don't. I think that so many people are so angry. I think that the middle ground sort of disappeared the first time a woman was forced to get a hysterectomy instead of an abortion. I think that middle ground is gone. My anger is so important to the work that I do, right? And I think it gets a bad rep. I think that you really can channel it in an incredible way and just commiserate with the anger. I think that in part is why people read the newsletter, I think, is because when I'm reporting on this stuff, I'm just as angry as they are. And I think finding those people who are as angry as you are is an incredibly useful exercise. At least it has been for me. There was one more thing I wanted to say about anger, but now it is out of my mind forever. Okay, it'll come back to me and I'll shout it into the wind when I'm signing books. But I don't. What motivates? I mean, oh, that's what it was. Thank you. Amazing. It's not just the anger, it's the pettiness. I'm extraordinarily petty. I think that you sort of have to be like, there is, like, channel your pettiest self. Like, when I think about like the anti-abortion activists and what they're doing, I am like looking into every little tweet that they've done. I want to take them down individually. And maybe that's not emotionally healthy in the long run to be, obsessed with taking down individual people and being petty about it, but it gets shit done. It means that you can find out really embarrassing things about political operatives. And so use that pettiness, not just anger, but pettiness. That's where I wanted to go. Thank you. Okay. I think that was all that we had time for, but I'm happy to talk to some folks, and I'll be around. And if you have to leave and you want to ask me a question that you didn't get to ask, I'm very easily findable at jessicavalenti@gmail.com. So feel free. Thank you for coming out.